Good evening. Tom Greerty here with Martinez Life, and I'm going to read you some stories tonight and some poems. We don't have a guest. Things didn't work out that way, but I do have some stories. We've been working on them for some time, and I've got a few for you tonight. Maybe not the best, but they're pretty good. Let's start with one about the cannery. Trucks came from all over, Stockton, Modesto, Manteca. They'd enter the gate, pass over that little rinky-dink bridge, and go on the scales to get weighed. Tomatoes from heaven, crates of them, boxes of them, millions of them. Then the forklift driver would start unloading until down into the vats they would roll. A huge tomato sauce was being made. You could smell it all over Martinez. It was the cannery's doing. They had a contract to make pizza sauce with a crazy but smart guy in New York. He wanted fresh California sweet tomatoes cooked with oregano. Martinez got the wafer. Then the cans would start, 5 gallons apiece, little ones too. The noise would bounce off the walls, sending the sound outside into the night air. You could hear yourself talk inside, that's how loud it was. Then Tino would pull the whistle, and the whole north end of the town would get tingly up its spine. The cannery was at work. People were making money. Women were happy, kids smiling, and the whole north end smelled like pizza. That's the old cannery. I think it closed in about 1972 or something like that, but it was there. The Costanza brothers started it years ago, and it started with fish, and then it went into the vegetable market, and ultimately, when I remember it, in the late 50s with tomatoes. One of the guys that worked there lived on Escobar Street down the hill from us, and he was a character, a real character, and this is about him. Red was his name. Tony Red lived with his sister down the street from us. He was considered very funny. He hung out at the bars and ran around with all the Italian guys and loved Notre Dame. That was his school, even though I don't think he finished Alhambra. But that was his school. Notre Dame for him was everything. On Saturdays in the fall, he'd listen to Notre Dame's progress on the radio, and then later, of course, on TV when football became ubiquitous. That he drank way too much, there is no doubt. But he never hurt a flea. He had a voice all his own, which he gave out garbled sounds that were almost a new language. It allowed him to kind of make up words and mix sentences. Listening to him was to laugh, because Martinez was above all else funny. Martinez was going no place to guys like Red, and that was okay with them. The people who tried to subdue Martinez and make it behave were lost on Tony Red. He just meandered around town, giving the place a perfume all its own. Then came the day when everybody decided enough was enough. Tony Red has got to go to South Bend, Indiana, and he's going to see Notre Dame play. It was unanimous. Eddie Miller got the tickets out of the Travelers Hotel, and Jimmy Mulcahy got him the train fare paid for his customers down at the Hub Club. They had taken up a collection. Now all that was needed was for Tony Red to leave town. And you know what happened. There's no doubt. This is when I was a young boy, and we lived out on G Street on the corner of Alhambra and G. I could hear the singing, almost shouting, in unison. This often happened when my aunt came for the summer. I moved closer, put my thumb in my mouth to help me think, and wondered how they got that power. It was always welcomed in my grandmother's house, and she especially tried to instill it into my heart and soul. I could see the both of them there at the piano. Sister Rita, a full-fledged nun. would be facing the wall, her hands pounding the keys, her veil pulled back so far as almost to reveal her hair color. And Grandma's voice moving gently through pursed lips as nothing mattered except her love. They were always that way. The Greertys enjoyed singing, and that generation especially enjoyed heaven's music. I went to the front porch and looked in the window in my grandmother's house. She saw me and waved me forward. I came in the front door to be greeted by the unique smells of her home and that powerful singing. Sister Rita didn't miss a beat. Grandma pulled me close, and the three of us continued singing, "How Great Thou Art." Those were the days. But there was the last night at George and Andy's on Ferry Street when they closed. And I've heard this story many times from Oski and Anthony before. The last night at George and Andy's, they put the jukebox out in the street and moved their feet. There was Andy, there was Oski, there was Tony, there was Red, there was Tootie. Then the cops came and told them all to go home to bed. Yeah, old Martinez. When we moved from G Street in Alhambra, we went downtown, and that was a unique experience because on Escobar from Barralesa to the top of the hill, that neighborhood was full of Sicilians. They were in nearly every house. Most of the Escobar houses were second-generation houses. By that I mean they grew up usually down closer to the water, perhaps at Granger's Wharf. The houses I entered with my friends pretty much had a template to them. They all smelled good. They were warm in winter and cool in summer, and oftentimes the family activity would be set aside from the formal living area, which might even be roped off or at least covered. I speak of furniture here, but in the aroma of those houses came the pungent fragrance of flowers cut from gardens. They all had gardens. Flowers first, tomatoes second. Then came the smell of salami and cheese, an odor I became an expert at deciphering because my mother didn't believe in salami. She believed in roast beef, to my dismay. Then came the power of garlic. I liked garlic even before I was 10. Then came the odor of sauce, tomato sauce in a big cast iron pot, over and over and over with the rhythm. Then there was the Toscanelli. Yeah, and the sports teams we played on, we had a lot of great coaches, a lot of great people, but I think Anthony was the greatest coach we had when we were kids. So I got a poem for him. Anthony Pellegrini. Anthony was our coach. No matter what sport, no matter what season, he was so much of our reason. Even when we left to play elsewhere, he'd show up in the stands to remind us he was still one of our great fans. A natural-born teacher, a bit of a preacher, who had been said was so fierce when he played at Alhambra that other players believed he was trying to kill them. Well, Anthony really wouldn't hurt a flea, but he was a duffel bag man with a trunk full of bats and balls and old plays from which new touchdowns could always be made. Then he'd throw a fit if he heard any one of us ever wanted to quit. For no matter what field, no matter what dream, no matter who was ahead, no matter what scheme, Anthony was invincible and could convince you that you too were invincible and that destiny was on your side and that God was with you. That was the great Anthony, the great Pellegrini, a grand oracle who would get all emotional and foam at the lips and raise his voice to a fever pitch and then fall into that spell where all great team speeches do dwell. Then he'd raise his voice into a slight yell and the whole room would gel. There's Anthony, our coach. But I first heard Eddie, my love, down along Foster Street, where the Green Gang used to hang. Kenny the cop. Can he read? Good cop. Let us off a few times. Cut us some slack. Good cop. Kenny the cop had a flat top, and used to shop talk when he'd stop at the old U-Save parking lot. He was a good cop. For in the light of Pacheco's full moon and in the wandering amber of bay laurel, we swore oaths of fealty to buddies always wealthy, the Dukes of Earl out there in the valleys, real pearl. We'd drive along and go out the Alhambra Valley. We'd drink beer and what have you out there, and when we were 16, 18, 19, and we'd go out there, we'd go out to Pacheco's and Pereira's, and up Ferndale Road. This is about Kenny McNamara. He lived at 218 Main. I've got something to read about him before, but he was all league, and I grew up with him at basketball in Alhambra. And Kenny Mac could dribble behind his back and find the open man, sharing total command. But with the yo-yo, he was the king, doing anything with that string. And where we hung out on Main Street, there was a good loquat tree there. Loquats grow very well in downtown Martinez. Ever eat loquats right off trees? Ever eat pomegranates just as free? Ever eat plums, cherries, and oranges just as free? Ever won a game of kick the can and freed the last man? Oh, what a feeling to free the last man. Then you were a king of our Main Street gang. Tourist basement just up the corner from McNamara's was full of pipes and used mics where we'd pantomime in songs driven into our souls by the newfound rock and roll. In baseball, we played for St. Catherine's, we played for the boys club, some played Little League. Tony Barlatani coached third when we rounded the curve, waving us on, giving us the green light, calling us champ, whether or not we were out. He followed us throughout our careers, watching from the rear. Then up front, he'd steer us again and say, "You can do it, champ." Tony Barlatani. He was a good coach. When I went to grade school before Alhambra, we went to St. Catherine's grade school, and the custodian at St. Catherine's was Pete. He was Dutch and tough. He came to Martinez after the war and the great resistance against the Nazis in his homeland of Holland. He had a barrel chest and a direct and forthright manner. He replaced Mrs. Scola, who was the master of the mob, but got tired just as we hit critical mass. He replaced Mrs. Scola, but Pete was no pushover and took his job very seriously. He also became the scoutmaster of Troop 184. That was our Boy Scout unit, which most of us joined. Pete went for eagles, not stars. I was a slow leak when it came to scouting, and Pete was a hamburger man, crispy on both sides. Tura was my good friend. He thought Pete was funny. Pete thought Tura was a slow leak too. Hands on the floor! That meant push-ups. We had to do push-ups. We did them for hours. Pete had no let-up in him. It was all downhill as far as he was concerned. We cut him a lot of slack and gave him room so he could build his eagles. Tura did a wonderful imitation of Pete behind his back, which was very funny. Ronnie's imitations were always funny. Luckily, Pete never saw any of them. He would take us camping, maybe 50 of us, up into the mountains. We'd set up tents, build campfires, and go on hikes. Pete loved to hike. He took us on a 50-miler one time. No sweat off that man's brow. His accent enthralled Tura, my friend. Tura almost has perfected it as we've gotten old and Pete is gone. When we get together, Pete lives on in our reunions. Hands on the floor, Tura will say. It sounds eerily like Pete, who once told us of hiding with the resistance under a frozen Dutch bridge, waiting for the German army to pass overhead. That was late one night around a smoky fire up in the Santa Cruz Mountains when the Junker scouts they'd all gone to bed and Pete was up looking for eagles. What a guy Pete was, I'll tell you what. You know, in 1958, they played a football game. Alhambra played a football game against Crockett, John Sweat. And they had Jim Turner. You remember Turner, he was a fabulous star of that era. He played later for the Denver Broncos. But we had McLaughlin, and we had Toriyama, and we had DeMonter and Cadnasso. We had a powerful team. That team was loaded with talent. Holy Toledo. Big guys, Weifels, Kelleher, the list goes on and on. Crockett was built into the side of a hill that spilled into John Swett High School. That's where they played that famous game in '58 when McLaughlin ran wild and the Bulldogs smiled. We rode in the back seat of Mrs. Turazol's, and Tommy Edwards sang his song, It's All in the Game. That's how memories are made. We love sports. I mean, we could not get enough of sports. We played basketball, St. Catherine's, Montecito basketball, Alhambra, the great games during the Christmas break when we'd be away from school or whatever. The guys would come back, the alumni, and come back. We played Christmas break. They were competitive games. The Turners would come back, Norval, Ronnie, and Richard, and all the gang, and it was great. But we used to love to go see the Giants. And there was a peanut and beer man that used to work at the A's Stadium and the Giants, and his name was Ish Padilla. Every game, Ish Padilla walked the stairs to meet our cares at Kezar, at Seals, at the Stick. He was an easy pick, for Ish Padilla was a natural vendor, an easy blender, loved by the fans up in the stands. He was an old Portuguese guy with a lot of personality, and he worked hard. Oh, we loved Ish Padilla. You know, in the Friday nights and Saturday nights, the bands used to come down to Ferry Street. The bands, the music. And they'd go to Butch's Bar, which was my brother-in-law's, and I was the night man there. I did the door work. Butch was my brother-in-law. He had his place. At College Lane, they didn't have bands. Down the street a little bit, they had a band occasionally, down where the Pacheco family had a place. Amatos didn't have bands. It was when, on a weekend stand, came many a band, full of singers trying out new zingers. With their amps, they'd camp a town crowd around their loud electric sound. There it is. The bands used to come Thursday through Sunday. But when we were younger than that, before we turned 21, Johnny Gray used to ride his bike every day down to the boys' club where he played. We all live figuratively in the shadows of smiles, eating up all the limelight of 1,000 bike miles. Oh yes, and Big Pete, my friend Peters, hit Ferry Street well beyond 6 feet. He was tall, kind, and full of fun, but Ferry Street could get a man undone, and so it almost occurred. But he lived, and our lives have gone on. That was a little Andy was next door in the College Lane from Butch's place. No rumor could pass from Andy's grasp. No gossip could be mixed with the drinks he fixed. For Andy taught the night class with a shot glass and a beer back. Full of stories and town glories, but only the truth did he aim at those who came. When we were even younger at St. Catherine's and we used to mix with the kids at the junior high and the Martinez Elementary, we'd all end up at the same place. Pennies were handy at Bunny's candy store, where we went as kids forevermore. The school bells would ring and together kids would gather at her counter to sing for Tootsie Rolls and other cute little things. Ah, yes. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. The Oleates. I'm going to read you a little story. We've been doing poems. How about a little story? Frank Fennett. This is when high school. This is the early 60s high school. Frank Fennett called Shimmy as soon as he got home. He spoke in a low voice so that his mother could not hear him. We need 2 6-packs and a package of Crooks. Oh, God, I hate those things. All right, I'll see what I can do. That'll be $10 total. You can pick them up at Wink's tomorrow night at 6. You better have some ice. Neither Fennett or Shimmy, who were over 21. But Shimmy always portrayed himself as a can-do guy. He drove a red and white Corvette and he was always on the verge of flipping. How he obtained the alcohol for Frank Fennett and his gang was never clear. All Fennett knew or cared about was that Shimmy could come up with the requested booze within 24 hours. Fennett knew Shimmy would buy 2 six-packs of Ole Stubbies. The boys in Fennett's gang only drank Ole Stubbies. In fact, they called themselves the Ole Eights. Fennett limited his gang to 8. Presumably, there were other teenagers who wanted to enter this gang, but they were denied by Fennett because he wanted to keep it cohesive. Fennett carefully chose the membership. Included were 3 guys with cars, which was an important item, who realized that transportation meant opportunity for secrecy, a very important thing in a teenager's desire on Friday night. Fennett's gang always went up to the same location, the upper part of Ferndale Road. Ferndale Road was one of those isolated roads out in the heart of the Alhambra Valley. The sheriff's office, which was responsible for that jurisdiction, only went there to do things they didn't want to have seen anyway, so there was no problem for the boys. They loved being up there with the moon, the stars, the sky, and the quiet. The members of Fennett's gang were interesting. They were all given a membership card by Fennett. He included Grizzy Big Body. Fennett also saw himself as kind of a mayor of the group. He loved making plans and giving orders. His gang was a perfect opportunity to do so, and also in his gang was Crazy Lilo. Crazy Lilo was short, stocky, and full of ankles. He was always calling guys chicken and pansy, and he loved to give guys the boots. Frank Fennett and Crazy Leo shared one passion in common. They